The Krathians disembarked from their ship, stepping onto the soft, uneven ground of the planet with a sense of cautious anticipation. Their boots sank slightly into the damp, moss-covered earth as the humid air immediately assaulted their senses. The sky overhead was thick with an eerie red glow, casting an unnatural hue over everything, and the distant sound of animal calls echoed in the distance, some of which sounded far too large and dangerous to be ignored. "This is the Deathworld," Karish, the mission commander, muttered under his breath, scanning the landscape with suspicion. His voice was laced with disbelief. "This is nothing like the reports." Around him, the rest of the Krathian team checked their equipment, their fingers itching to engage their advanced tools and weapons. The environment was clearly hostile, but the reports had painted a far more threatening picture. They'd expected constant danger from every corner: acidic rain, poisonous flora, and a constant barrage of predatory life forms. The team had braced themselves for an unrelenting nightmare of survival. Yet, as they surveyed the immediate surroundings, they saw nothing but an overgrown jungle, filled with massive, ancient trees and thick vines that reached toward the sky like living tendrils. It was wild, untamed, and incredibly beautiful, but nothing particularly deadly. "I've read the reports," Karish continued, his voice becoming more condescending. "We've faced worlds far more hostile than this. A few predators, some harsh weather. It's all manageable." His second-in-command, Olan, gave him a skeptical look. "Don't underestimate the planet, Karish. There's more going on here than we know. This is a Deathworld after all." "Perhaps," Karish said dismissively, "but it doesn't look like one." He looked around again, making a sweeping gesture with his hand. "We'll scout the area. We'll identify whatever threats exist, catalog them, and move on. No need to waste time here." Just as Karish turned to give the order to proceed, something strange caught his eye. A human figure, casually walking toward them from a path that seemed almost carved into the earth itself. The human was alone, wearing tattered clothing and carrying a bundle of spears slung over one shoulder. Karish frowned, his keen Krathian eyes narrowing. He had expected the planet to be entirely untamed, with no signs of civilization. But here was a human, moving effortlessly through the terrain as if this place was a playground rather than a deadly jungle. The human didn't seem to notice the Krathian group at first, casually scanning the area as if it was just another day in the wilderness. A deep sense of unease stirred within Karish. This was a Deathworld, yet the human showed no signs of fear, no hesitation. "Well, what do we have here?" Karish said with a raised eyebrow, turning to his team. "Isn't this adorable?" The human paused, sensing the Krathians' presence. With a quick glance, they locked eyes. Karish was taken aback by the utter lack of fear in the human's expression. A moment passed. Then the human gave a wide, toothy grin. "Ah, visitors." The Krathians tensed. The human was unfazed, their voice easy and confident, as if encountering a group of armored, technologically advanced beings was just part of the daily routine. Karish was taken aback by their nonchalance. Without missing a beat, the human raised a hand in greeting. "I'm Drayla. Welcome to our world." Karish blinked. "Drayla, do you realize where you are? This is a Deathworld." Drayla's smile widened. "Is it now?" She raised an eyebrow, looking around casually. "Looks fine to me. You'll get used to it." A tense silence hung in the air as Karish processed the human's words. His mind raced. This planet was supposed to be hostile, lethal, yet here was a human, walking through it like they were at ease. His curiosity sparked, but so did a growing unease. The human's casual demeanor seemed to mock the very nature of the planet itself, and that more than anything was unsettling. "I'll show you the ropes," Drayla added, already turning toward the thick jungle ahead of them. "It's better to learn from someone who knows the land." For a brief moment, Karish stood still, stunned by how comfortable Drayla seemed. How could one human be so confident. It was as though the planet itself was playing a joke on them. The rest of the Krathians exchanged uncertain glances. Karesh, however, managed to regain his composure. "Lead the way, then," he said, voice cool, but inwardly he couldn't shake the feeling that they were in over their heads. The next morning, the Krathian team woke to the sounds of birds calling in the distance and the rustling of leaves as small creatures scurried about. The air was cooler than the previous evening, and the dense humidity of the jungle had momentarily lessened. They gathered around the campfire, their senses still on edge despite the calm of the morning. Drela had already begun preparing breakfast, using a mixture of local herbs, fruits, and roots. She moved with such ease, as if the entire jungle were her kitchen. Karesh, on the other hand, found himself growing increasingly frustrated. The night had been filled with too many unsettling revelations, and despite the clear utility of the human survival strategies, Karesh was beginning to feel a growing unease about their methods. "We've seen some of what this world has to offer," Karesh said, his voice steady but tinged with growing doubt. "But there's something we're missing. If you truly live with this planet, as you say, then how do you deal with the real threats? The ones that won't be avoided or reasoned with." Drela stopped what she was doing, her back still turned to the group. She seemed to consider the question for a moment, then turned slowly, her face expressionless. "You're right. Not every threat here is something we can talk down or simply avoid." She glanced at the dense jungle around them. Some threats need more decisive action. Karish's mind raced as he waited for her to elaborate. "And when those threats show up, what do? You can't possibly expect us to believe that you face down every danger here with your bare hands." Drela's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Of course not. But we've learned to control our environment. And we've learned the price of knowledge." There was a weight to her words that struck Karish like a physical blow. "The price of knowledge," he echoed. She nodded slowly, her expression growing more serious. "Surviving on this planet requires more than understanding its creatures. It requires sacrifice. We know how to live with it, yes, but there are parts of this world that you cannot fight with brute force or even subtlety. The key is to know when to leave well enough alone, and when to fight back." The air around the campfire seemed to grow heavier, the distant sounds of the jungle taking on a more ominous tone. Karish instinctively checked his weapon at his side, his tension mounting. "What do you mean by sacrifice, exactly?" Drela's gaze grew distant for a moment, as if recalling a past memory. Then she stepped toward the group, her eyes locking with Karish's. "The true power of this planet isn't in its creatures or even in the plants. It's in its nature. You learn to read it, to harness it, but that means paying attention to its patterns. You must understand that some things must be left alone, for their wrath is too great." "Like what?" Olin interjected, clearly eager for more details. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Drela's expression darkened. "The Maw Hunters." A murmur ran through the Krathians. The Maw Hunters were legendary on this planet, a race of enormous, serpent-like predators that had been known to hunt anything that moved, even the most dangerous of creatures. It was said that once they locked onto prey, they would never relent. "The Maw Hunters are unlike anything you've seen," Drela continued, her voice low and steady. "They're not just dangerous. They're precise, ruthless. And if you're not careful, they'll turn this entire jungle against you. The price of knowledge is not just learning to survive. It's understanding that some knowledge comes at a price you can't pay." The words hung in the air, thick with gravity. Karish swallowed, trying to comprehend the enormity of what Drela was saying. If the Krathians had underestimated the world around them, they were in far deeper trouble than they realized. "How do you deal with them?" Olen asked, his voice shaky. "What do you do when you come face to face with them?" Drela stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the surrounding jungle. Then with a steady, resolute voice, she answered, "You avoid them. Avoid them. Karish repeated incredulously. You don't fight them. Drela's gaze met his, cold and unyielding. No, you never fight a maw hunter. If you see one, you run. The moment you encounter one, your only option is to survive. No weapons will stop them. No tactics will defeat them. The price of challenging them is your life. The Xrathians stood in silence, absorbing her words. They were accustomed to dominating every new world they encountered, bending it to their will. The idea of running, fleeing was foreign to them, a concept that violated everything they stood for. And yet, Karish felt a chill run down his spine, the weight of Drela's warning sinking deep within him. The maw hunters weren't just predators. They were a force of nature, untouchable and unrelenting. He felt a surge of respect for Drela's words, though it came with a bitter taste of fear. Now you see, Drela said quietly. Knowledge has its price, and sometimes it's the hardest lesson you'll ever learn. The Xrathians followed Drela through the dense jungle, their eyes constantly scanning the environment for any signs of danger. The air was thick and heavy, the heat oppressive, but Drela moved effortlessly through the undergrowth, as if she had done this every day of her life. Her boots barely made a sound as she stepped over rocks, around vines, and through thick bushes, while the Xrathians struggled to keep up, their advanced equipment occasionally getting snagged by the sharp, thorny plants that grew wild around them. How long have you lived here? Karish asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. Drela glanced over her shoulder and grinned. All my life. We've been here for centuries. Karish's brow furrowed in disbelief. Centuries. The idea of a human population surviving and thriving on such a planet was unfathomable. Even with their technological superiority, the Xrathians had calculated that the environment here would be lethal to most species within a few months of arrival. Yet Drela moved as if this was nothing more than a stroll through a park. They came upon a clearing, the sun filtering through the thick canopy overhead, casting dappled light across the ground. Drela paused, turning toward a large rock formation jutting from the earth. It was smooth and round, with deep grooves carved into its surface, as though something had been scratching at it for generations. Right here, Drela said, pointing toward the rocks. It's a good place to set up camp. Karish's eyes narrowed. Set up camp. This is the most dangerous part of the planet. Predators roam here. Any wrong move, and we could be. Before he could finish, there was a sudden rustle in the underbrush. A growl rumbled from deep in the jungle, sending an unsettling shiver down Karish's spine. A massive form emerged from the shadows. A creature as tall as a house, covered in thick, spiked scales. Its glowing eyes locked onto the group, and a low hiss escaped from its mouth. It was a predator, one of the many deadly beasts the Xrathians had been warned about. The Xrathians instinctively reached for their weapons, hands trembling as they activated their energy rifles. Karish's voice came out in a low growl. Get ready. This is what we've trained for. But Drela didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes calculating, and without a word, she stepped forward, walking toward the creature. The Xrathians froze, their confusion deepening. What is she doing? Olan whispered, his voice barely audible. Karish could only watch in shock as Drela continued to approach the towering predator, who was now growling louder, its massive jaws snapping dangerously. The humans had no weapons, no shields. They seemed utterly unprepared for the imminent danger, yet Drela didn't seem to notice. Drela, get back. Karish barked, stepping forward to shield her, but she simply raised a hand to stop him. It's all right, Drela said calmly, her voice steady as she continued her slow, deliberate advance. This one isn't looking for a fight. The Xrathians could hardly believe their eyes. Drela reached the creature, and to Karish's astonishment, she placed a hand on its thick hide, right near its massive head. The creature's growl softened, its aggressive stance relaxing. I told you, Drela said, smiling back at the stunned Xrathians. We've learned to communicate with them. You don't always have to fight. The creature gave a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, before turning away, lumbering back into the jungle. Drayla lowered her hand and turned back to the Krathians, who stood frozen, utterly speechless. "How did you?" Karish began, but the words caught in his throat. "How do you think?" Drayla replied, her smile widening as she tossed her hair over her shoulder. "We've learned to coexist with the creatures here. You can't just blast everything that moves. This isn't some foreign planet where you get to impose your way. Here, you adapt, or you don't survive." The Krathians exchanged uncertain glances, their previous confidence slipping away. They were accustomed to confronting every threat head-on, relying on their weapons and technology to control situations. But Drayla and the humans didn't need weapons. They didn't need brute force. Instead, they used patience, understanding, and an uncanny ability to read the world around them. Drayla's words echoed in Karish's mind. Adapt, or you don't survive. The idea that this planet's inhabitants could thrive without relying on the same tools the Krathians valued so highly unsettled him. "Let's set up camp," Drayla said, moving to a nearby fire pit that had been expertly cleared. "We've got a long night ahead. The real danger comes when the sun goes down." Karish was about to protest, but the look on Drayla's face stopped him. She wasn't worried. In fact, she seemed comfortable, like she was at home. And as much as he hated to admit it, that made him nervous. The night settled in quickly, the thick canopy overhead muting the stars, leaving only the distant glow of fireflies to light the way. The sounds of the jungle came alive, but the humans seemed entirely unfazed, moving about with a sense of purpose and calm that only added to Karish's growing sense of unease. As they gathered around a fire, Drayla offered the Krathians a seat near the warmth, though she didn't sit herself. Instead, she paced around, casually preparing food from what seemed to be local plants and game. Tools of survival that appeared far more rudimentary than anything Karish had expected. His team, still on edge, hesitated to accept the hospitality, but hunger won out in the end. "Go on, eat," Drayla said, tossing a small bundle of dried herbs and roots toward Olan, who eyed it suspiciously before taking a tentative bite. "We've encountered a number of dangerous species on this planet," Karish began, his voice authoritative, though tinged with an undercurrent of curiosity. "I assume you've developed weapons for defense." Drayla stopped, her gaze flicking to Karish with an almost amused look. "Weapons? No," she shook her head. "We don't need them here." The Krathians exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean?" Karish pressed, unable to hide his disbelief. "You've survived on a Deathworld for centuries without weapons. What kind of madness is that?" Drayla chuckled, leaning back against a tree as she gazed into the flames. "It's not madness, Karish. It's survival. You think because we don't use the same tools as you, we're weak?" Her voice softened, almost reflective. "This planet doesn't respect strength in the way you think. You can't conquer it. You can only learn to move with it. We understand the rhythm of this place, and that's what keeps us alive." Olan's voice interrupted the moment. "But you don't understand. The creatures here they're dangerous." Drayla cut him off. "Yes, we know. But danger is everywhere. Here, we've learned that confrontation is just one option. You need to listen to the world around you. Fight when it's necessary. But more often than not, it's about knowing when to avoid, when to move silently, and when to adapt. That's how we survive." Karish leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "So, you avoid the creatures then? You negotiate with them?" Drayla paused, her eyes flicking toward the glowing jungle. The fire crackled, and for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of distant insects. "Not exactly. Negotiation is a skill, but survival here is much more about understanding the environment as a whole, knowing how it all fits together. The creatures, the plants, the weather. It's a system, Karish. You don't fight the system. You learn how to work within it. She stood up, moving toward the edge of the camp, gesturing for them to follow. I'll show you what I mean. This way. Reluctantly, Karish and his team stood and followed her, the flames of the fire flickering behind them. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Karish noticed that Drayla seemed to know exactly where she was going, her every step calculated and precise. It was as though the terrain was as familiar to her as the inside of her own home. They arrived at a small clearing, filled with large, brightly colored plants. Some of them hummed faintly, emitting strange, soft pulses of light. Drayla knelt down beside one of the plants, her hands gentle as she touched the base of a glowing flower. This is a Reslian bloom asterisk. It's rare, but it's also essential. The nectar from the petals is what keeps us strong. It boosts stamina, helps fight off certain toxins from the local creatures. She turned to the Krathians. This is the kind of resource you wouldn't even notice if you were too focused on your weapons. Karish watched as she carefully plucked a few petals, crushing them in her hand and inhaling the scent deeply. You're telling us that a flower, this thing helps you survive. Olen's voice was thick with skepticism. Drayla grinned. You're missing the point. We're adaptable . We've learned to use what's around us to read the land. Take the Reslian bloom, for example. In the right conditions, it helps us fight off fatigue and heal faster. But in other circumstances, it can be deadly. If you pick it wrong, or if you mishandle it, you'll be paralyzed in minutes. Karish's eyes widened. So you trust these resources, these plants, to survive? Exactly, Drayla replied, standing again and brushing her hands off. Everything here is a potential tool, Karish. Every living thing has its place. The creatures, the plants, the weather. You learn to listen, to watch, and to adapt. Then do you start to survive. The firelight flickered as they stood in silence, the sounds of the jungle growing louder around them. Karish's mind raced, processing everything Drayla had said. It was a philosophy completely foreign to him and to his people. They relied on technology, on force, on weapons to conquer worlds. But here, the humans thrive not by force, but by understanding. You're not just surviving, Karish murmured, more to himself than anyone else. You're living with it. Drayla gave him a knowing smile. Exactly. And that's the secret. The next morning, the Krathian teen woke to the sounds of birds calling in the distance and the rustling of leaves as small creatures scurried about. The air was cooler than the previous evening, and the dense humidity of the jungle had momentarily lessened. They gathered around the campfire, their senses still on edge despite the calm of the morning. Drayla had already begun preparing breakfast, using a mixture of local herbs, fruits, and roots. She moved with such ease, as if the entire jungle were her kitchen. Karish, on the other hand, found himself growing increasingly frustrated. The night had been filled with too many unsettling revelations, and despite the clear utility of the human survival strategies, Karish was beginning to feel a growing unease about their methods. We've seen some of what this world has to offer, Karish said, his voice steady but tinged with growing doubt. But there's something we're missing. If you truly live with this planet, as you say, then how do you deal with the real threats? The ones that won't be avoided or reasoned with. Drayla stopped what she was doing, her back still turned to the group. She seemed to consider the question for a moment, then turned slowly, her face expressionless. You're right. Not every threat here is something we can talk down or simply avoid. She glanced at the dense jungle around them. Some threats need more decisive action. Karish's mind raced as he waited for her to elaborate. And when those threats show up, what do? You can't possibly expect us to believe that you face down every danger here with your bare hands. Drayla's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Of course not. But we've learned to control our environment, and we've learned the price of knowledge." There was a weight to her words that struck Karish like a physical blow. "The price of knowledge," he echoed. She nodded slowly, her expression growing more serious. "Surviving on this planet requires more than understanding its creatures. It requires sacrifice. We know how to live with it, yes, but there are parts of this world that you cannot fight with brute force or even subtlety. The key is to know when to leave well enough alone, and when to fight back." The air around the campfire seemed to grow heavier, the distant sounds of the jungle taking on a more ominous tone. Karish instinctively checked his weapon at his side, his tension mounting. "What do you mean by sacrifice, exactly?" Drayla's gaze grew distant for a moment, as if recalling a past memory. Then she stepped toward the group, her eyes locking with Karish's. "The true power of this planet isn't in its creatures or even in the plants. It's in its nature. You learn to read it, to harness it, but that means paying attention to its patterns. You must understand that some things must be left alone, for their wrath is too great." "Like what?" Olin interjected, clearly eager for more details. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Drayla's expression darkened. "The Maw Hunters." A murmur ran through the Krathians. The Maw Hunters were legendary on this planet, a race of enormous, serpent-like predators that had been known to hunt anything that moved, even the most dangerous of creatures. It was said that once they locked onto prey, they would never relent. "The Maw Hunters are unlike anything you've seen," Drayla continued, her voice low and steady. "They're not just dangerous. They're precise, ruthless, and if you're not careful, they'll turn this entire jungle against you. The price of knowledge is not just learning to survive. It's understanding that some knowledge comes at a price you can't pay." The word hung in the air, thick with gravity. Karish swallowed, trying to comprehend the enormity of what Drayla was saying. If the Krathians had underestimated the world around them, they were in far deeper trouble than they realized. "How do you deal with them?" Olin asked, his voice shaky. "What do you do when you come face to face with them?" Drayla stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the surrounding jungle. Then, with a steady, resolute voice, she answered, "You avoid them." Avoid them, Karish repeated incredulously. "You don't fight them." Drayla's gaze met his, cold and unyielding. "No, you never fight a Maw Hunter. If you see one, you run. The moment you encounter one, your only option is to survive. No weapons will stop them. No tactics will defeat them. The price of challenging them is your life." The Krathians stood in silence, absorbing her words. They were accustomed to dominating every new world they encountered, bending it to their will. The idea of running, fleeing was foreign to them, a concept that violated everything they stood for. And yet, Karish felt a chill run down his spine, the weight of Drayla's warning sinking deep within him. The Maw Hunters weren't just predators. They were a force of nature, untouchable and unrelenting. He felt a surge of respect for Drayla's words, though it came with a bitter taste of fear. "Now you see," Drayla said quietly, "knowledge has its price, and sometimes it's the hardest lesson you'll ever learn." The atmosphere in the camp had shifted since Drayla's warning about the Maw Hunters. The once warm and inviting jungle now felt like a looming threat, as if the very earth beneath their feet could betray them at any moment. Karish and his team had always prided themselves on their ability to face down the deadliest of creatures across the galaxy, but the concept of fleeing from an enemy, especially one as fearsome as the Maw Hunters, was not something they were prepared for. Drayla, sensing their unease, quietly packed up the camp with deliberate precision. Her movements were measured, confident, and completely at odds with the tension in the air. She seemed unaffected, but the Krathians could tell that her thoughts were elsewhere, perhaps already anticipating what was to come. "Do you know where they are?" Karish asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. He wasn't afraid to admit it, not to Drayla, anyway. The stakes were too high. The Maw Hunters. Can you sense them? Drayla paused in her packing, a look of mild amusement crossing her features. Sense them? I don't sense them, Karesh. I watch for them. You learn to spot the signs. The way the birds scatter. The sudden silence. And sometimes, the most important sign is the lack of movement in the trees. When everything is still, that's when you know something's wrong. Olan, his face pale, looked over at Drayla. So we just run at the first sign of trouble. Drayla nodded. You'll know when it's time to run. Trust me. They set off shortly after, the team following Drayla into the dense jungle. The path ahead was thick with foliage, vines twisting around the trees like the arms of a living creature. The air was still, the usual hum of the jungle muted as if the land itself was holding its breath. Drayla led them with the calm, unwavering confidence of someone who had lived on this planet for decades. To the Krathians, it felt almost like a dream. How could she be so casual in the face of such danger? They walked in silence for hours, the thick jungle closing in around them. The Krathians remained alert, eyes constantly shifting, weapons at the ready, though they knew Drayla would likely forbid them from using them. The sense of foreboding continued to grow, and Karesh found himself wishing for something, anything, to break the oppressive silence. Then, without warning, Drayla stopped dead in her tracks. The others quickly followed her lead, their boots crunching on the forest floor. She held up a hand to signal for them to remain still. Her face was completely serious now, a rare moment of tension breaking through her usual calm demeanor. Karesh's heart began to race. What is it? He whispered, though he didn't want to break the silence. Drayla's eyes scanned the trees above them. Something's watching us. The Krathians instinctively looked around, their weapons tightening in their grips. The hairs on the back of Karesh's neck stood on end. He had been in hostile environments before, but this felt different. It was as if the jungle itself had become a predator, observing them with unseen eyes. I don't see anything, Olan whispered, his voice tight with apprehension. Not yet, Drayla replied, her voice low and measured. But it's here. They're close. Karesh's mind raced. How can you be so certain? How do you know? Before he could finish his sentence, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low, resonant rumble filled the air, shaking the trees and sending a shiver of dread through the group. The sound came from all around them, low, guttural, like the growl of an unseen predator. Drayla's eyes flashed. Run. Now. There was no time to think, no time to question. The Krathians broke into a sprint, the sound of their boots pounding against the jungle floor echoing in the stillness. Drayla led them through the dense trees, moving with the grace and speed of someone who had long mastered the art of survival. Behind them, the growl intensified, and the unmistakable sound of something massive moving through the foliage echoed in their ears. Karesh's heart was pounding in his chest as they ran. The air grew thicker with every step, the jungle becoming more claustrophobic. Vines reached out like fingers, trying to ensnare their legs. The sounds of the jungle seemed to distort, twisting into a cacophony of chaos that masked the very thing they feared most. The Maw Hunters were closing in. Karesh could hear them now, heavy, purposeful footsteps crushing the underbrush, like the weight of mountains moving through the trees. They were fast, faster than anything Karesh had ever encountered before. He knew they were gaining on them, and for the first time, he realized Drayla's calm wasn't just bravado, it was experience. She was keeping them alive. They broke through a thicket of trees and stumbled into a small clearing. Drayla stopped, holding up a hand to halt the team. They gasped for breath, their bodies covered in sweat and grime, their eyes scanning the darkening jungle around them. They're not far, Drayla said quietly, her voice steady, though there was a cold edge to it now. Keep moving. Don't stop until I say. Karesh nodded, his heart still racing. He didn't understand it. How Drayla could stay so composed, how she could lead them through this perilous situation with such ease. But one thing was clear. They weren't prepared for this world, not by a long shot. And now, they were learning the true cost of survival. The jungle was alive with a sense of imminent danger, the air thick and suffocating. The Xrathian team stood frozen in the clearing, their breaths ragged as they tried to regain control of their racing hearts. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to stretch further, and the oppressive weight of the jungle bore down on them like an invisible hand. Karish could feel his pulse thumping in his throat. Drayla stood in the center of the clearing, her expression hard and calculating. She wasn't out of breath. She wasn't panicked. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, and though her face was as stoic as ever, Karish could see the tension in her every movement. The Maw hunters were near, too near. The low rumbling from the jungle had stopped for now, but Karish knew that was only temporary. The silence felt like a warning, a lull before the storm. He didn't know what to expect next, but the sheer terror in his gut told him that whatever came next would be unlike anything he had faced in his career as an elite soldier. "Drayla," Karish whispered, his voice tight with unease. "We need a plan. We can't just keep running forever." Her gaze flickered to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She was still listening to the jungle, her senses attuned to every shift in the environment. She held up a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. "Listen," she murmured. The Xrathians froze, straining their ears. The usual hum of the jungle had vanished completely. Even the wind had stilled, leaving an eerie, unnatural quiet in its wake. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then there it was, a low hiss, deep and guttural, reverberating through the ground and into their bones. The Maw hunters were close, very close. Karish's mind raced. The hiss wasn't a sound a predator made before an attack. It was the sound of something knowing its prey was nearby. The creatures weren't rushing. They were hunting. Drayla crouched down, her movements fluid, her voice barely a whisper. "We wait. We don't move until they pass us." "What are you talking about?" Olen's voice cracked in disbelief. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. We have to fight back." Karish shook his head, his eyes fixed on Drayla. "Listen to her, Olen. She knows what she's doing." Drayla's gaze flicked toward him, a faint hint of approval in her eyes. She didn't respond directly to Olen, but instead continued scanning the trees, her body tense as she waited. Time stretched on, the seconds feeling like hours. The jungle was still, so still it felt like the very air was holding its breath. Karish gripped his weapon tighter, sweat trickling down his spine. The hissing sound grew louder. There was no mistaking it now. The Maw hunters were circling, their enormous bodies slithering through the undergrowth like predators in the shadows. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the rumbling sound returned, shaking the trees. Karish's pulse quickened, and he could feel the primal fear seeping into his thoughts, though he fought to control it. The Maw hunters were coming, closer now, and there was nowhere to run. Drayla held up both hands in a calming gesture, signaling to her team. Her voice was barely a breath. "Do not make a sound. Do not move." Karish swallowed hard, his hands trembling despite himself. He was no stranger to dangerous situations, but this was different. He had always believed that Force could resolve any problem. That firepower, tactics, and courage were the answer. But now, in the face of an enemy that could tear them apart without even breaking a sweat, all his usual confidence had drained away. Suddenly, a dark shape emerged from the trees, a silhouette so massive it could only be one of the Maw hunters. Its long, serpentine body coiled through the jungle, its sleek scales reflecting the faint light that filtered through the canopy. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intensity, fixed on the clearing where the Xrathians lay in wait. Karish's heart skipped a beat. The creature's size was beyond anything he had imagined. Its massive, gaping mouth lined with rows of jagged teeth was a terrifying sight. and the way it moved, almost like a shadow, sent a cold shiver up his spine. The creature hissed again, louder this time, as if testing the air, seeking out its prey. Drayla was still, perfectly still. The Maw Hunter paused just on the edge of the clearing, its head swiveling slowly from side to side, its tongue flicking out, tasting the air. Karish could feel his own breath catching in his throat. The creature was so close. He could see the shine of its scales in the dim light. The ground seemed to pulse beneath his feet as it moved closer. Minutes stretched like hours. Karish thought for certain that the creature would spot them. The Maw Hunter's gaze was intense, scanning every inch of the area, searching for even the smallest sign of movement. But Drayla wasn't moving, not even a muscle. And then, just as Karish thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, the Maw Hunter turned away, its great body coiling and slithering back into the jungle. The tension that had held the group in place for what felt like an eternity released in a collective exhale. Drayla waited for a long moment before standing up slowly, her face unreadable. "We move now. Quickly." Karish could barely speak, his chest still tight with adrenaline. "How did you know?" Drayla's expression remained calm, though a glint of pride flickered in her eyes. "You can't fight a Maw Hunter. Not with weapons. You only survive by outsmarting them." She paused, looking around at the team. "This is their world. We just live in it." With that, she led them forward, her steps silent in the thick underbrush. The jungle seemed to breathe around them as they moved, the air heavy with humidity and the faint scent of damp earth. Every step felt more deliberate than the last, every rustling leaf or distant bird call setting Karish's nerves on edge. The Maw Hunters had passed, but the lingering fear of their presence was like a shadow that wouldn't let go. The silence that had followed them was only a fleeting calm before the storm, and Karish felt it deep in his bones. Drayla led the group through the dense underbrush, her movements fluid and quiet, like a creature born of the jungle itself. The Krathians followed closely behind, their senses heightened, their eyes constantly darting between the shadows. Their weapons were still holstered, but Karish could feel the tension in the air. They were prepared for anything, but the danger of the Maw Hunters was something beyond even their training. "Keep moving," Drayla ordered quietly, never breaking her pace. "We need to reach higher ground. The Maw Hunters won't stay in one place for long." Karish nodded, not sure if he was reassuring her or himself. His mind was still spinning from the close encounter. The sight of the Maw Hunter, its immense body, its glowing eyes, its hunger, was a memory that would haunt him for a long time. The raw power of the creature was beyond anything Karish had encountered. It wasn't just dangerous. It was a force of nature, an unstoppable predator that could erase everything in its path. As they continued, the jungle around them seemed to shift. The path grew steeper, the trees taller, and the ground beneath their feet more uneven. The constant sense of being watched never left them, but it was Drayla's calm that held the group together. She never faltered, never hesitated. Every decision she made was calculated, every movement precise. It was as if she had been living this nightmare for so long that it had become second nature to her. "We're almost there," Drayla said after what felt like hours of trekking through the jungle. "We need to get to the ridge. From there, we'll be able to see the surrounding area." Karish's heart sank. He had hoped that once they reached higher ground, they would find some sort of safety, a vantage point from which they could assess the situation. But the reality of the planet was that no place was safe, not from the Maw Hunters, not from the jungle itself. As they approached the ridge, Karish could feel the air growing thinner, the tension building again. The jungle, though still alive with its usual sounds, seemed quieter now, as if everything had gone still in anticipation. The trees parted slightly, revealing a narrow pathway that climbed up the ridge. It was a natural break in the foliage, a rare opening. Drayla moved ahead, her eyes scanning the ground as she led them up the rocky path. The Krathians followed in her wake, each step more cautious than the last. They were close now, so close that Karish could see the ridge ahead, the rocky outcrop that would give them the height they needed. But as they reached the top of the ridge, the moment of clarity they had hoped for never came. Instead, they were greeted by the sight of something even more terrifying than they had expected. From the edge of the ridge, Karish saw the jungle below, a sprawling, endless mass of green and shadow. But there, just beyond the trees, were the gleaming eyes of the Maw hunters, 2 pairs of them, each staring from different vantage points, waiting. The creatures had anticipated their move. They had been tracking them for longer than Karish realized. "Get down." Drela's voice was urgent, commanding, as she pulled them all low to the ground. They dropped instantly, their hearts pounding in their chests. Karish barely managed to keep his breathing steady. The Maw hunters were all around them, their massive, sinuous bodies weaving through the undergrowth like living shadows. It was a trap. A slow, patient trap, designed to corner them, to force them into the open. For the first time, Karish understood the true nature of the Maw hunters. They were not just predators. They were patient hunters, skilled in the art of waiting and watching, biding their time until they struck. And now, they were waiting for the Trathians to make a mistake. "Don't move," Drela whispered, her voice low and steady. "Don't give them a reason to come closer." Karish's mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to survive this. But in that moment, with the Maw hunters circling them, the reality of their situation set in. There was no running now. There was no fighting. They had to survive with the one weapon they hadn't counted on, their own ability to adapt. The minutes stretched, every second feeling like an eternity. The Maw hunters remained still, their eyes glowing in the shadows, but they had not moved closer. They were waiting for the Trathians to make a mistake. Drela's eyes flicked to Karish, and in that brief moment, he saw something that sent a shiver down his spine, a look of understanding. They had already lost the moment they stepped into the jungle. Now, they were only hoping to make it out alive.